Welcome to the Bracket Factory and welcome to my latest video about drive shafts, more specifically about drive shaft angles. So the internet is awash with information on drive shafts and drive shaft angles. Some of it is right, some of it is wrong. There are also lots of examples, particularly on Facebook, of it being done incorrectly. So I thought I'd put this video together to show you everything you need to know in order to do your own drive shaft installation. So when I've explained everything, we're going to go through a case study which happens to be my project, the big V12 engine Speedster. I've got to do a drive shaft installation on that project, so we're going to run through the different options that we have available. Now, if we want to understand why angles are so important, we need to talk about these. UJs. Well, we call them UJs in the UK, but they're also known as Cardan joints. So here we have a small, convenient, hand-size Cardan joint. Now they're called Cardan joints, named after an Italian polymath from the 16th century called Girolamo Cardano. He didn't invent these, but he did invent the concept of a gimbal, which is basically what this is. They're also known as hook joints, because in the 17th century, a guy called James Hook sort of wrote more about them, did the maths around them, and he coined the phrase hooks joints. You also might recognise them as spicer joints because an American guy this time in the early 20th century started to make these for automotive use about 1905. So it's very important to understand how these behave. And what we're going to start off with doing is saying what they're not. What they're not is CV joints. Now, a CV joint is a later invention, about the 1920s, and CV stands for constant velocity. That means the velocity going in produces a constant velocity going out at all angles within tolerance. This is not a CV joint. The output isn't a constant velocity, and understanding that gives you the key to why angles are so important. So let's go over to the bench and do some experimenting. Right, so we're over at the bench and here we have some of my favourite stuff, Meccano. For Meccano anoraks, this is all red and green, dates from the 1950s, apart from these pointers, which are nice and pre-war, from the golden era of Meccano, 1930s. Anyway, the whole point is that we've got a Meccano UJ, and what we're going to do is we're going to see what happens when we rotate the shafts at an angle. Now when it's running straight through, you've got basically constant velocity. If I turn this 90 degrees, that turns 90 degrees. Simple. But let's see what happens if we actually change the angle. So let's bring it round to 60 degrees. Now 60 degrees is pretty much the maximum that a UJ can work at until it binds. But that doesn't mean you can use it at 60 degrees, it's on the limit of self-destruction. But so we've got this pointer pointing at 12 o'clock. This one also pointing at 12 o'clock. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this one through 90 degrees. 90 degrees. Let's look and see how far this one's turned. Nowhere near. Nowhere near. Only it's turned about half as much, turned about 45 degrees. Now we're going to put another 90 degrees in and see what happens. Boom, goes all the way down. Now they're both aligned. But what you can see is that after 90 degrees, it's only gone half as far. So if it's gone half as far in the same amount of time, it's doing half the speed. For the second 90 degrees, it's catching up, so it's going twice as fast. So that means you've got two different velocities, and you've got a change of velocity, you've got acceleration. Now, if you imagine you would try to attach the engine to the wheels like that, and you're doing 100 miles an hour, the wheels either want to go 200 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour every revolution, well, twice every revolution. You can see that the whole thing would explode within seconds. So let's take a look at a little graph. Here we go. Here's one I prepared earlier, Blue Peter style. So you can see here that this is the angle of the UJ in degrees. And this is the maximum percentage increase here. At 60 degrees, it's going twice as fast and half as fast. At 45 degrees, it's 41% faster, which happens to be a square root of 2. Down at this end, down at 15 degrees, it's plus or minus about 3%. And which doesn't sound like much, but it is still quite a lot. So round here is the maximum angle you want to be using in UJ at. Up to 10 degrees, that's about 2%. Between 10 and 15 degrees, warning, warning. After 15 degrees, danger, Will Robinson. It's going to shake itself to pieces, start vibrations, and everything is going to go boom fairly quickly. So this is the very first angle that we want to talk about. This is the angle of a single UJ, the maximum angle it can operate at. So we're aiming 10 ideally, 15 at an absolute push, but don't drive too fast. Right, let's put that to one side and talk about what we can actually do about that. Now, the good news is, if we're converting a constant velocity to a non-constant velocity, it works the other way around, doesn't it? It means a non-constant velocity converts to a constant. So if we put another UJ on the end, we should be able to cancel it all out. Let's do that. So now we've added another UJ to the system, and this is typically what it looks like in a car. You've got the engine going to the the engine going to the gearbox, going to the drive shaft, going to the diff at the back. Not exclusively what it looks like, but typically. So we've got a constant input velocity, does its own crazy thing in the middle, and then it goes to constant again. So if we turn this now at 90 degrees, our input and our output are synchronized. Now, they are synchronized if and only if two things are true. Firstly, this angle is the same as that angle, and don't forget, it could be that way or it could be that way. Angle's the same, so it's synchronized. The other thing that's important that's true is that these two yokes here are aligned with each other. If they're aligned, then it's doing an equal and opposite thing at both ends of the drive shaft, so it's converting the motion. So that's all fine, our angles are the same, but what if they're not the same? What if it's a bit like that? If it's like that, we're back to this graph. And we're back to the difference between these two angles. If these two angles are 2 degrees out, either 2 degrees out that way or 2 degrees out that way, then we're back on this curve, aren't we? So, and the difference between an individual UJ angle and the difference between the input and the output is that there's nowhere left to go with the difference in the input and the output. So we have to be right down here, 2 or 3 degrees. 2 degrees is okay, 3 degrees difference, then we're in danger territory. So that is the two angles that we need to understand. One, total angle for a UJ. 2, the difference in these two angles, which is what we're left with in the drive line. So now we understand those two key angles. Let's talk about a real live example and see how it affects the drive shaft, the gearbox angle, the diff angle, all that sort of stuff. Let's do that now. So let's take a quick look at the case study. So this is it. It's a 1935 Daimler Chassis, and the engine and gearbox are being swapped for an American La France V12 engine and a Rolls Royce gearbox. Now, because it's being swapped, the entire engine and gearbox is moving quite a long way backwards, and the gearbox used to finish about there, which gave us quite a long prop shaft. The diff is a slightly unusual diff in that it is underslung. So the input to the diff is well below the center line of the diff. And just by looking at the situation of the gearbox output and the diff, I can see, just by eyeballing it, that is quite an angle. I don't know what it is, but it looks too much. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a few sums and work out what the actual angle is. We're going to assume that this pinion angle is horizontal. It's not quite, but let's, for the sake of the calculations, we'll assume it's horizontal, and currently the gearbox is also horizontal. So let's do a few sums. Right, so let's work out the angle of the drive shaft as it stands. So let's draw a little picture. So that's our box and axle. Now our UJ center is sort of there, so we need to take that into account. So what we need to measure is that, and this, of course, is the angle that we're concerned with, because this is the UJ angle, so we need to work that out. So I've done some measurements, and I know that that is 71 centimeters, and I know that that is 19.5 centimeters. So we know that tan theta equals opposite over adjacent, that over that, so equals 19.5 over 71. And if I calculate theta from that, theta comes out as 15 degrees. 15 degrees. Let's look at our chart. Danger, Will Robinson. So we're right at the end of the amber zone. That's no good. So as it stands, that angle is too steep. Even though we can make sure that the input and output are parallel, we tick that one, well, we can tick that one, but that's too steep. So what we need to do now is review our options. So an obvious option is to lower the gearbox. Now, I've already set the gearbox in the chassis where I want it to be, and I don't really want to make it any lower. But let's just do some sums and work out how much lower that would need to be in order to get our angle in our good range of 10 degrees. So let's do that next. So we can use the same diagram. We just say question mark theta, and this is the dimension we want to work out. So we know that tan of 10 degrees equals x over 71, opposite over adjacent. So x equals 71 tan 10 degrees, and x happens to work out as 12.5 centimeters. Okay. So in other words, I need to lower the box by 7 centimeters. So let's have a look at the chassis and see what that actually means. So this is the box in the chassis. Now, of course, at the moment, we don't have the weight on the chassis, and that will lower it down somewhat. So we're not just sort of lowering this chassis point by 7 centimeters. But the whole box would need to go down. So what we're really concerned about is our ground clearance. How does the bottom of the bell housing, which is here, how close does it get to the ground? Okay, so to lower it by 7 centimeters, we're going to be left with a ground clearance of about 13 centimeters. And that is significantly lower than the diff. The diff is about 20 centimeters. So if I do that option, I'm making the bottom of my bell housing the lowest point. Question, do I really want to do that? I'm not sure. So let's look at another option. So right, we're now looking at option 2. And option 2 is to tilt the engine and gearbox down by about 5, let's say 5 centimeters at the back. Now a lot of people who have been watching the channel will be saying, I've been saying this all along, you should tilt it down and improve it. Well, let's just work through the maths and see if you're right, shall we? So let's say we tilt it down, lower it down by 5 centimeters, and that actually equates, because the whole engine and box is 1.6 meters long, that equates to 2 degrees. So we've now tilted it down by 2 degrees here. Also, this distance is now 14.5, 71. So we're getting a kind of double benefit here. We've lowered it down, so we're reducing this angle. this angle now works out at 11.5 degrees using the maths. So whilst our prop shaft angle is 11.5 degrees, which is still too much, that's not what we're interested in. Remember, we're interested in this angle and this angle, the difference between the input and the angle. So it actually works out, it's 11.5 minus 2, which is 9.5 degrees, which is, we're now in our okay zone. So this would be okay. But of course, if we're tilting down the box, we also need to tilt up the diff, again, by ideally the same amount. Because if they're different, well, we don't want them to be different, we've got 2 degrees. We could, of course, leave it horizontal, and it's still going to be within 2 degrees, but now, of course, this angle is 11.5, and we don't really want that. So it's a possibility. We could experiment with some more numbers. Of course, I'm now bringing my sump down a little bit, not by 5 centimeters, but by probably 3 or 4. There's some wriggle room, but it's definitely an option, although I don't really want to have it tilting down. So let's look at another option. So option 3 involves replacing the diff. Now, what if I had a, in quotes, normal diff where the drive centerline was the same centerline as the axle? What height difference? Well, there's going to be a height difference. What difference would it make to the angle, and how good would that look? So let's take a look. Right, so this is what it looks like if I had a normal diff. The drive is going through the centerline of the diff, which means the difference in height is only 9 centimeters. And that gives me an angle of 7.2 degrees, which is well in my comfort zone. And in actual fact, when the weight of the engine is in the car, it'll bring it down even further. So probably in the low, 0 to 5 angle territory. So that would work. But it's a little bit radical, isn't it, to solve it? So are there any more options? Actually, yes, there is another option. And this other option involves the secret weapon often used by the 4x4 jack-up brigade, and that is called a double Cardan joint. So back over to the bench to explain the double Cardan joint. So remember when we were talking about this angle and this angle being the same, and it could also be like that? Well, that is a double Cardan joint, all going in the same direction. But more specifically, it removes this long drive shaft and brings this one next to this one. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so this is what a double Cardan joint looks like. You've basically got this middle yoke is back to back, and we now have a constant input and output velocity. And these are sometimes referred to as CV joints, although they're not true CV joints, because this middle yoke is obviously doing its own crazy non-constant speed thing. But of course it means I can now get a much greater angle by having this intermediate bit. And these things are available commercially, often fitted to Land Rovers in the UK and 4x4s and high-rise vehicles where you need more ground clearance. So let's see how this could be used on the setup exactly as it is now. So we're back at the original drawing, which shows the current situation, i.e. a 19.5 centimetre difference and an angle of 15 degrees, which we know is a no-go. So what we're going to do now is look at seeing how a double Cardan joint can solve our problems. And what we're going to do is put the joint just here and redraw it and see what it looks like. Right, so we've started to draw it, and I've put the box in, and I've put my double Cardan joint in here. So this is now still going through 15 degrees, but because it's going through 2 steps of 7.5, it's fine. So that's all good, but what about down here? We've still got to solve the angle here. So what we do here is we basically rotate the axle. So now we've got a constant velocity in there, a constant velocity out there, and because this is straight, or nearly straight, we've got a constant velocity. Now this obviously assumes that you can rotate the axle, and looking at mine, it looks like I can rotate the axle. But we can now see that this is what's referred to as the pinion angle. And the pinion angle all depends on what else is going on there. There's no such set rule for the pinion angle, but we know that the pinion angle needs to be 2 degrees plus or minus of this shaft here. Now what actually happens is that when you've got a leaf spring car, got springs like this, when the wheels are like this, want to turn in this direction, the axle wants to turn in that direction. So what it'll do is it'll try and twist on the springs, certainly on an old car anyway, or a car where the suspension is not that sophisticated. So what you do is you set the pinion angle down probably 2 degrees that way, so that under load it goes through neutral, maybe 2 degrees the other way. So on the strength of that, a double Cardan joint and rotating the axle will work. But of course, when I actually load the engine into the chassis, this is all going to drop down a bit, so it'll make that angle even less. And it's not until that's dropped down that I will finalise my pinion angle by adjusting the rotation of my diff. So there you have it. I hope that all makes sense. If it doesn't, please do leave a comment with any question and I'll answer if I can. As for those 4 options on my project, I haven't actually decided what I'm going to do. Could do the double Cardan, could do the new diff, and I could even tilt the engineer gearbox back a little bit, but I'm not really crazy about that idea. Anyway, what would you do? Would you pick one of those options, or is there a 5th option I've not even thought of? So if you've liked that or you found it interesting, please do leave a like. It very much helps with the algorithms. If you're still watching this, then you're very much supporting the channel, and I thank you for that. But if you want to support it even more, you could buy yourself one of these t-shirts available from the shop just up there. But I think now that's just about it, so thanks for watching.